This tip is about making it a point to highlight big concepts that underline the course more than once. Many instructors assume that once a topic or concept has been covered, students have it in their heads for good, and there really is no need to go back over it. We are going to look at why it is not only advantageous to remind the brain of what is important, there's a sort of magic that happens by inserting that time in between learning episodes. Let's start with this concept of inserting time in between learning episodes, breaking up learning or revisiting what has been learned. And I equate revisiting with learning because students will see the concept in a new light each time they revisit it, given everything they have learned in the interim. Instructors can do this within a single lesson, but there is added benefit when the returning is on a different day, so different class session. For those big underlying concepts of a course, I recommend doing both. This idea of inserting time in between learning episodes comes from the spacing effect. The spacing effect is the observation across many research studies that spaced practice, breaking learning into separate sessions over time, versus massed practice, learning everything all in one sitting, supports long-term learning. Students can spend the same total amount of time either learning something in one sitting or breaking that time up across multiple sessions, and they will learn it better when it is broken up across time. Let's take a look at a study that nicely illustrates spaced learning. In this study, two groups of students were asked to learn 20 new French vocabulary words. Both groups studied for a total of 30 minutes. Group 1 did all of their studying in one day, one single study session. Group 2 broke up their studying across 3 days, 10 minutes per day. 1 week later, both groups were given a surprise test on those same words. Group 1 averaged 11 words correct. Group 2 averaged 15, significantly higher than Group 1. Group 2 remembered more words. So, what does this experiment tell us about spaced learning? It tells us that it pays to space out learning, but it also shows us that learners don't necessarily have to study more, they just need to insert breaks. And we've all heard this. We know, for example, that students shouldn't study for an exam by cramming the night before. They should be studying a little every few days, getting started well before the exam, right? But why does spaced learning support learning? Before I give you my reasons, I'd like you to think about this for a moment. Pause the video long enough to consider why you think spacing supports learning. There are actually multiple reasons why it is believed that spaced learning works. First of all, it creates opportunities for something called retrieval practice. Retrieval practice is another powerful way to facilitate long-term learning that essentially involves students practicing retrieving what they have learned from memory. It's simply a matter of recalling what was learned previously without looking it up, at least before looking things up. Anyway, with spacing, every new learning session is an opportunity to practice retrieving what was learned previously, even if it is something students do unintentionally as they are learning the new material. Also, spaced learning leads to more effective consolidation, which is a term that simply refers to memory becoming more permanent, and it leads to more effective organization of those memories. Much of this organizing and laying down of memories happens during sleep. It also happens while taking a break. Anyway, the more opportunities for sleep or taking a break while learning something, the more solid the foundation. And finally, new learning depends on prior learning. Whenever students learn something new, they make sense of it by relating it to what they already know. Background knowledge isn't just useful for helping concepts to stick in memory, like we see with the elaborate tip. It's also how learners make sense of those concepts in the first place. For example, if I were to read the abstract of a journal article in a field that I am not overly familiar with, I am going to have a different understanding of it than someone who is familiar with the field. And our differences in what we each take away from the abstract is not only a result of our respective levels of expertise. We could swap out our chemistry expert with someone with equal chemistry expertise as me, but from another field, and we will also interpret the abstract differently because of the influence that our background knowledge in our respective fields shapes our understanding of the abstract. So that is one way of looking at this statement of new learning depends on prior learning. However, especially where spaced learning is concerned, new learning also depends on prior learning of the same topic or concept or skill. Let's say you were to read through this journal article on Monday and then put it away until the next day. On the next day, Tuesday, you would have a different perspective of it because of what you had learned on Monday. What you had learned on Monday would influence how you understand it on Tuesday in a way that would be different than were you to do all of that studying of the article on Monday. By revisiting on Tuesday, you benefit from the time the information from Monday has had to be consolidated and organized by the brain. I also like the analogy of building a brick wall for spaced learning. New knowledge builds on and is dependent on previous knowledge, and spacing is analogous to making sure those lower layers are soundly laid, building a solid foundation as students learn. Okay, back to returning to big concepts. Let's go over a few concrete ways to do this in the classroom. First of all, instructors can simply deliberately space out how they cover topics. I think instructors naturally feel like everything there is to know about a given topic should fit into a single, neat, and tidy lesson. Sometimes, despite an instructor's best efforts, they run out of time and have to finish up a topic in the next class session. However, this turns out to be beneficial because it means that topic is being spaced out over time, which means students are revisiting those big concepts. Another way to do this is to have a part 1 and part 2 of a given topic and to present those parts at different points during the term. Another approach is for instructors to introduce those key concepts of a course early on in a sort of introduction to the course, and to then return to each of them to cover them in more detail as the semester progresses. An added benefit of instructors doing this is by being exposed to those key concepts up front, students get a sense of the overall context of the course and what sorts of topics it will involve. Then, as the instructor returns to each of those concepts as they move through the course, students will have a better sense of how they fit in with the big picture of the course. Finally, there are naturally going to be connections among the topics of a course that highlight a big concept, perhaps a theme that underlines much of the course. Instructors often need to explicitly point these connections out to students, or at least prompt students to notice them as they encounter those topics. It may be difficult for students to spontaneously notice them on their own. Anyway, every time those connections arise in a course, that is an opportunity for students to revisit and learn a bit more about the concepts underlying those connections. How might you return to big concepts in your courses?